My name is John. I'm 26 years old, and I work at a previously local coffee shop. I say previously local because I don't think I'm anywhere close to that place. Let me start from the beginning. I was working as a cashier that day and taking orders. When I saw a person across the street, I didn't think anything of it. Till hours later when we had little activity. I saw that they were still there out of curiosity. I asked the other cashier if he saw the person, as well as they turned up to look at them. They looked confused, weren't they, standing there? Like 3 hours ago, he asked. I replied with a shrug and told him that I was going to check on them. As I headed out the door, I turned around to see most of my coworkers. Gathering behind the counter, I turned back and took a long look at them. They were wearing a black trench coat, a pair of dirty sneakers, and a baseball cap that looked like he didn't sat on his head his entire life. "Hey, are you all good? You've been standing here for hours now," I called out to him from across the street. He didn't move or show any signs of hearing me. Hesitantly, I walked across the street. And at this moment, I know why my parents told me to look both ways before crossing the street. Because at that moment, I was struck by a semi going well over the speed limit. I don't remember much of that, but what I do remember is that I didn't feel a thing. And the strange man lifted his head slightly. I saw a ghostly white face and the smile of a man whose no sympathy left. I remember hearing the sounds of my coworkers gathering around me. One of them was calling the police, and for a short while I could open my eyes. I saw the blood starting to pool around me, and people standing over me, but the thing I remember the most clearly was the other cashier was looking around, and I didn't realize this till later. But he was looking for the guy, which implies he either ran or disappeared. I woke up later in a hospital room surrounded by all sorts of equipment and many tubes running from my body. I took a good long look at myself. My right arm and leg were both broken and strung up from the roof. I tried to move my head, but pain shot through my body like electricity. My neck was in a brace, but I could still barely move it. But it still hurt to move it, so I just moved my eyes and not my head. I looked forward and saw a few x-rays. But they were pictures of a leg in them. And I think the last one was an arm. But it looked like a glass table that had been in an earthquake. As an educated guess, I think they were my x-rays. My leg was broken right at the place where it meets the hip. And my neck wasn't broken, but from what I could tell, something wasn't right. I tried to call out for any nurses or a doctor, but I couldn't produce any sounds. It's a strange feeling when your brain tells you to do something, but you can't. It gives you this feeling of confusion and fear. After this whole ordeal with not being able to yell, I remembered that hospitals have a button to call a nurse. I used my left hand to feel for it, and I didn't find one. But either way, I heard the door to the right open something. But either way, I heard the door to the right open something about the footsteps. It didn't sound right. They sounded uneven or out of time. I don't remember. Whoever they were walked over to my bed and started fiddling with the equipment next to me. And for some reason, I didn't alert them. I was awake, but as they were leaving, I must have pushed the button off the bed. Somehow, because next thing I know, there's a clatter on the wall. And whoever was in my room shambled over to the wall, never looking at me, and picked up the button and set it back on my bed. They started to walk over to the door, but they stopped at the foot of the bed. And for some reason, I closed my eyes, like I was sleeping, but opened my left eye. The nurse turned to face me, or at least turned her head to me, because she had no face, out of fear for what would happen to me if I did anything. I just sat in the bed and watched as she walked to the door and out into the hall. After a long time, I finally relaxed and I started to realize the true scale of my danger. And I let out a silent scream. I will spare you the day-to-day, but after a week or so of the faceless nurses, I became desensitized to it. And I just waited for the nurses to leave my room. They removed my neck brace after a month or so. And I heard from just outside my door some muttering. That didn't even sound like a language. But I could make out one word, miraculous, which was probably referring to my recovery not long after they removed my neck brace. And did they remove my leg cast? I think after a year in the hospital, I finally worked up the courage to yell out to the nurses, but no one came. Then I tried the button, but again, no luck. After that I realized they don't come when called, they come when they want to. At that I moved my right arm with my left, which hurt to high hell. But I threw my legs over the bed and pushed myself up. But instantly I fell to the ground, which I probably should have expected after sitting in a bed for a year. And then some. I pulled myself up with all my might and threw myself back into bed, and for the next 3 months or so I threw myself out of bed trying to build my strength. And eventually I taught myself how to walk again. Slowly I would make my way to the door and then walk back. One day I tried the doorknob only to find that it was locked. Each day I tried to open that damn door, but nothing would come of it. I eventually was able to run and walk like I was before the truck. I had the great idea one day to use the bed as a ram against the door. I grabbed the foot of the bed and pulled it forward. It slid with ease. And as I twisted, I started pushing it out the door with great speed. And within seconds, I slammed into the head of the bed. As it slammed into the door, I pulled it back to the wall again and tried again, but still nothing came of it. I tried for days, but then I had a great thought. What if I pushed the bed at the door when the nurse opens the door? And that's what I did. I waited. She didn't come for weeks. But when she opened that door, I was ready, and I pushed off the wall and slid at the door and slammed into the nurse. And just before I went through the door, I jumped off the bed and started running down the hall. As I ran, I heard a shrill shriek from behind me, and I turned to see what happened. Apparently, those things are incredibly fragile, because when I looked at it, it was bleeding this purple liquid from where I had hit it. With the bed, it collapsed to the ground with a dull thud. I continued to run without stopping, and as I ran through the halls, the nurses didn't try to touch me, they just kept moving on with their day. As I ran, the walls and rooms became more and more run down and decrepit. As I ran past these destroyed rooms, I saw those things forming from the walls, and these ones were aggressive, but at least for this part, they only came from the rooms. When I made it to the first floor, the hospital was practically collapsing this floor. The nurses didn't only come from the rooms, they came from everywhere. I started running down the hallway, but as I did so did the arms, and tried to scratch and claw at me. Some of them even got me, but I was running so fast they couldn't get a good grip on me. I ran past the reception desk and through the doors, and when I made it outside, there was nothing as far as I could tell. The hospital was the only thing that existed there. I didn't care, though, because I just ran and ran and ran without stopping. I made it so far that I could just barely make up the outline of the hospital. In the distance, I sat down in the empty field and eventually fell asleep or passed out. It was one of those two. I eventually woke up in the one place I didn't want, to the same hospital. I first woke up and somehow I knew I wasn't home. I looked around the room trying to get my vision to focus. As I was doing this, I noticed a person sitting in the chair next to my bed. I still couldn't see, but I could make out a baseball hat, a dirty black coat, and a pair of dirty sneakers. Slowly looked up to his face, and I didn't need my vision to focus to know who was sitting next to me.